Sean. So once again, everybody, my name is Brandon Hummins, and I am the orchestrator of this series that we have going on right now called Humanizing Procurement. And I want to tell you before we jump into it why we are doing this session. Everybody's a busy person, right? Everybody on this call has some sort of connection to the corporate world of buying, selling, doing some of the exchanges that we have going on, all that complicated stuff, right? But when you really get down to the core of it, the main purpose of this entire session is to add value to our working lives and to reaffirm the human side of our existence. What inspired this was actually something that happened to me a couple years ago when I was at a different job. My wife and I went on vacation, and some of you may have heard the story already. But we went on vacation. We took a long weekend. We spent about Thursday to Tuesday out. And when I got back on Tuesday, I sat down on my computer. I was messaging back all of my stakeholders, and my supervisor walked up to me and said, "Hey, Brandon, what are you up to?" And I said, "Oh, just catching up." And he says, "Oh, well, if you're going to email this person back, I just want to say that they passed away over the weekend that you were gone. You're going to be working with Jim now." Then he walks away. That really touched me in a lot of ways. I knew this person. I knew this stakeholder. I knew about her fears, her joys, what she was going to be doing over the summer with her kids, what type of dishes she liked to cook. Because in the world of procurement, one of the main things that we do is form relationships. We care about the people. We care about the outcomes of the things that we do and how it affects the world. That's the entire idea around some of the ethical practices of procurement. And if we start to remove that people part of it, the human element, I deeply believe that we lose part of the embodiment of a good strategic sourcing professional. So we have this session here, and I'll get into a few more stories that I've shared with Kevin as well, but he is a fantastic speaker, a fantastic procurement professional. He works at the Fitch Group, and when we were first talking about his appearance on the series, he really walked through some of his experience around how do you actually show the value of strategic sourcing and the importance of showing that value. We all know that it's important, but there are so many other people out there that have no clue about what procurement does or what they do. So with all that being said, I'm going to stop and I'm going to introduce our featured keynote speaker, Kevin Giblin. Kevin, are you here with us today? Do you want to go ahead, turn your video on and tell us a little bit about yourself before we start diving into everything?
Yeah, first off, thanks, Brendan and ISM-Chicago for having me here. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about something that's near and dear to me and always has been. That's promoting what does sourcing and procurement actually do for our business partners. Now, before we start, fortunately, this is not a discussion on technology because as it's not your screen. I had a power outage here, so I had Plan B and. Don't adjust your set. Don't adjust your glasses. The blurredness and the lack of connectivity is on my end. So, but we're not talking about technology. We're talking about procurement sourcing. So that's a good thing. So without further ado, the one thing that I think is really important is in this series, which I love. And when Brandon asked me about doing this series, I loved about the education and promoting what we do. Now, it's not going to be about today's session about what are some of the classes that you can take. What it's really about is how do we help showcase to businesses what we actually do? And it isn't about an organization that buys pens and pencils or that got a contract and saved 10%. Is that part of what we do? Absolutely. But that's really way down the list. And so we'll kind of go through that. Do I have control of the slides here, Brendan?
I can try to give you control. I'm sorry about that.
Right. Not a problem at all.
And then let's see. Or for now, I can try to drive it if
All
that
right,
also.
not a problem. All right, I'll let you drive. So next slide. All right, so as I said, these are the things I want everyone to get out of today's session. What we do, there's a lot of ways you can measure how we bring value to our organization. But what often happens is we think of it from a vacuum. What do we think the business partners want to hear or see from procurement? Based on who your audience is, they may not care about the metrics you're presenting. So how do we present the value that resonates with different individuals? What are some of the insights that I can share, tips and tricks that will optimize what you do? And as I said, the metrics have to matter. So make what you do resonate. Next slide. So one thing we did a while back, and it was a really interesting study, is what we do, what do we think we do, versus what's the perception that the business parties have, and how do we effectively move the needle based on meeting what they want us to do. So if you look at what's on the right, and I'm sure these slides will be shared with you, so I don't have to go through the detail, but really, if you look at the reducing the supply chain risk, clearly that's an obvious win-win in this day and age. Support overall transformation objectives of the organization. Procurement's ability to be agile. I think that's an underlooked opportunity for us as an organization. Next slide, Ren. Thank you. So this is where we focus on value. Procurement's been known as how much should you save your organization? But if you think about that as really an outdated metric, it's really about what value is the procurement function and sourcing bringing to your organization. And look at it this way. Post-contract, beyond negotiating the agreement, post-contract. And what do we mean by that? It's looking at opportunities for collaboration and innovation. Maybe somewhere in your supplier supply chain, they've got another customer that has found a way to reduce costs, for example, for their overhead lighting in their warehouse in Iowa, and they share that with you. And they're an office supplies company. Why would they do that? Well, how does it impact you? It impacts the relationship, and it brings value because you can take that idea and bring it to your CFO and your executive team and say, hey, we've got some opportunities here. We're collaborating with the supply partner. This is what they've done with other customers. Over the next 5 years, and I think it will continue beyond that, it's much more than savings. We've actually now started to think of the term CPO as a CVO, Chief Value Officer. And I think that is really where we're heading to as an organization. Next slide. And again, this is the evolution from being a transactional and strategic function, no question, on the sourcing side, but a relationship management function, building from the very beginning with stakeholders, with suppliers, with the supply chain, with the external market, understanding how we can use I call it the Willie Moscone approach. If anyone knows who Willie Moscone is, there was a movie called Minnesota Fats, and it was about the two most famous billiards players in the world. One was Minnesota Fats, the other was Willie Moscone. Well, Willie Moscone once said about the reason why he was successful is whenever he was lining up a shot in a billiards match, he was always thinking 3 shots ahead. Where would that ball land? Once he does the next shot, where would that ball land, and so on. And that's the way we need to look at how we evolve as a function. We don't want anymore for the business partners to say, which they do still today, what exactly does procurement do? What we do is we help to drive the business growth. And that's what this is all about. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about, how are some of the ways that we do that in promoting. And I'll give you some examples of some of the metrics that matter, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide. So to do that, this is kind of the checklist or the essential steps to make sure we have sustainable sourcing value. It all starts with how much are we spending and who are we spending it with. Now that you have that, profile your market, your category of spend, and prioritize your opportunities. Identify those, analyze the market, gather your requirements, formulate and execute on a strategy, and look for continuous improvement. That's how you're going to be able to build the case for sustainable sourcing value. Next slide. Now, this is a really interesting one. This is a tip and a checklist that I always share with my teams at any organization I've been to. When we ask questions in an RFP, or we ask a supplier to quantify things in the contract around quality or performance measures, performance feedback, marketplace understanding, responsiveness, the SLAs, building a relationship, the customer relationship manager, how they communicate. I don't think it's fair to ask a supplier to do things that you don't do well yourself or that you don't know internally. So I always ask anyone on my team, before you ask the supplier that question, ask how we're doing it here first. If we don't respond to the supplier, why should we expect them to respond to us? If we're not giving well-defined requirements in our RFP, how do we expect a quality contract or output? If we're not giving feedback, continuous feedback to a supplier or listening to their feedback during the course of relationship, then a business review is meaningless. Understanding how they work with other companies, right? So segue perfectly. So let's talk about metrics that matter. And this is one of my favorite slides. The commonly used metrics that we have in procurement. What's the operating cost versus the percent of spend that we manage? What's the return on investment? You have the sourcing function. How are you getting your return on investment on what we do? How much are we spending per active supplier? What's the actual realized savings as a percentage of what we've identified as savings? And this is a kind of a fun one, the purchasing dollars as a percentage of the sales dollars. Now, these are all great metrics, but you know what? Who do they mean anything to? Just us. You talk to 90% of the people in the business, they'll say, who cares? So what? So, next slide. This is what we started to do. We started to look at, based on your audience, give the metrics that matter. Now, if you want to talk about your savings, that's great. CFO, finance, absolutely. That's probably all they care about, quite frankly. Year-over-year productivity improvement. How much are you automating the procurement process using AI, using automated tools to do your RFPs, et cetera, et cetera? Who cares about that? The CTO, the COO? How are you utilizing your RFPs? What audience cares about that? Well, the CFO has probably paid for the tools and the platforms they're using, chief operating officer as well, operations. They'll care that you're driving automation and leveraging better deals. Leverage buying, your sales team, your business partner, obviously they'll care about that. Your payment terms extended. Accounts payable will love that. They'll partner with you. In fact, we partnered with AP so well in a couple of organizations, including the one I'm with now, that we said, join us. And AP is now part of procurement. And that's becoming a pattern in a lot of organizations. Cycle time improvement. Salespeople love this one because if you've ever heard the noise about it takes too long to onboard a supplier, we need that supplier because they're helping us build a product out to market. Guess what? If you've automated and you've improved the cycle time by 50%, salespeople will be your best friend. And so that's why I'm talking about metrics that matter. Next slide, Ben. So how do we create value post-contract? Yeah, I showed you the kind of the uptick before. Well, obviously, we know that if you walk away from a contract after you sign it and don't care about supplier performance management, you can walk away from anywhere from 5 to 15% savings over the next 3 years. Collaborate with supplier. Talked about the lighting thing before. Supplier development efforts can improve prices by 3, maybe even more percent. Compliance. If people don't utilize the contract that you sign, you can lose 75% of your negotiated savings within a year and a half. And that's a crazy number, but it's actually true. And of course, risk mitigation. Supplier performance is going to improve by about 25, 26% on average. And this is all stuff that's all across a lot of broad research and people that I've talked to in the network. All these things I'm showing you here on this particular slide are great, but do they resonate because they've actually been practically applied in business? Maybe not to you. So let's talk about some of the things that actually would resonate. Next slide, please. So this is my favorite part of what we're going to talk about today. I kind of want to get a sense. I'm sure that most of you that are listening here today have had this happen when you're actually in the office. In this world we're in today, that doesn't happen as often as it used to, but walking down the hallway or you're in the elevator and you're passing by or you went in the elevator with someone who doesn't know you're in procurement. And what are they talking about? How procurement takes too long. Always complaining about procurement. So I picked up on that one time. Next slide. And there's a lot of things that we can do to help you. So I want you to hold that thought about the complaint in the elevator. But the one thing we also want to make sure business partners understood is this isn't about just a team that you come to when you're almost done talking to the supplier and, hey, can you look at the contract? What you want them to do is come to you from the beginning, and you can help your business partner understand the market. And this is one example where we were looking at a cybersecurity effort a couple of years back. Don't do anything. Don't talk to suppliers. Let us look at what the market's going to look like first. And then when you need to go get your budget, you can get CFO to understand, oh, this is where it's going. Yeah, we got to invest in this. So that's what this particular slide is about. Next slide, please. And here's another one. Another business partner is always tough to work with is legal. We understand that for legal, and this is what they always tell us, we don't care about how much money we save. What we care about is that we win litigation. And they're right. If they're going to be in court and the company is being sued for whatever reasons, they want to make sure that they win the case and they don't have to pay litigation fees. But that being said, is it okay if we take a look at where you're spending your external legal dollars? And lo and behold, if we find out that you're paying top dollar for a paralegal resource, but you're actually getting a junior partner in Midtown Manhattan, how about this? Maybe what you really need is for that same low-level type of work that you're paying a junior counselor, you can have a paralegal do it in Montana. And so that's kind of going through that exercise. Now, if there's a case that they win, they still have the legal costs that they have to pay. But if you're paying less legal costs, it's a win-win. So that's what this one's all about. Next slide. Okay, now we get to the heart of the matter. Coming back to the elevator speech that I told you about. In this particular case, the business partners, I got tired of hearing them complaining. If procurement takes too long, we have a request, we have to onboard a supplier, they take too long. Next slide. And so this is what we did to start. Let's make the complainers be part of the solution. So we did a survey, we found who were our key users, and what we found out is there were about 300 stakeholders that were frequent flyers, if you will, using procurement over the past 12 months. Based on the survey questions we asked, 31% of those 300 said that they were somewhat or very satisfied. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm looking at going to a new restaurant and I look at the Saga review and it gets a 31% rating, I'm probably not going to go. I'm sure you wouldn't either. The other thing that was important is it was taking, on average, we looked at all of the onboarding requests over the past year, average of 17.6 days to onboard suppliers. Now, sometimes they took 1 or 2 days, sometimes they took a month, but this was the average across all of them. 45% of all of those new engagements took more than 15 days. The benchmark average that we found researching was about 10 days. So that was our baseline where we started. And it was clear that the customers complaining probably had a good case, but we're not going to let them get away easy by just complaining. They're going to be part of the solution. Next slide, please. And so we put together a RACI chart. We put together a project plan and process map. And then the most important thing is I went to the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, and I said, we would make this an agile project. And he said, this isn't an agile project. It has nothing to do with what we typically put in that bucket. But humor me, I said, I think we can get this to work like an agile project if we're implementing a new software tool. And so he agreed reluctantly. And this was our building blocks and how we started. Next slide. And so this was what we wanted to do, create a better and more efficient supplier engagement using agile methodology. And our goal was to reduce the 17.6 days to less than 15. And this was the mission statement that we presented at the kickoff meeting. Next slide, please. And then we talked about what were some of our goals. Well, we want to improve the cycle time and the customer experience. Those are the black and white two main things. So we got all these things agreed upon that we want to start with. Now, this slide is perfect. This chart, thank you. Because what we wanted to also find out, because we knew that it would be asked, is you're telling us ours is 17.6 days on average. Well, what's good? Where should we be? And so we kind of, divide and conquer that. We knew that we had almost half were taking more than the 15 days, as I mentioned. But what did that mean based on the market, right? Our average was 17.6 days. Chief Compliance Officer, he specifically asked that question. What does that mean? Next slide. And this is, I always call this, if you're in procurement, which you all are, always use what I call the next page slide. And this is my next page slide, because what would happen is you want to anticipate some of the questions and let that individual know, oh, that's on the next page, which this was. When he asked about 17.6 days, what does that mean? I said, well, the average from what we've seen is actually 19 days average, but the best in class is about 10.8. So we knew where we were. We needed to improve. We weren't as bad as some organizations, but we certainly weren't best in class. And so it's always nice to have that next page slide. And speaking of that, next page, please. Thank you. So here, we came back to the 45% again. And so almost half of what we were doing was exceeding the industry average. So we had to improve, and we had a baseline of where to start improving. Next step, please. And so, jumping way ahead, but we put this agile project together. We created a focus group, which included the complaining customers, made them part of the solution, worked with all the business partners that were part of the process flow from the time that somebody says, hey, I want to work with this supplier, all the way to the time you can cut a PO. And over the course of several sprints, if anyone's been involved in an agile project, you know how the sprints work. We went from that 17.6 day starting point and 31% customer satisfaction, moved the needle over the first 3 sprints, 10.1 days. Now we're in best in class territory, 65% or more than double customer satisfaction. And then after sprint 5, we were able to kind of close out the success. Just a little bit over 9 days, and almost 3/4 of the customers, actually a little bit higher, were now satisfied or somewhat satisfied with procurement. Well, they're already 100% now. We know that. But look at how much it improved over the course. And this was how we showed the business partners and ourselves, quite frankly, what does procurement actually do, or what can it do besides just saving money? We've impacted, in this particular case study, the customer experience, the internal customers, supplier experience, which will lead to lower costs, more influence. The business partner will come to us more. There was a problem. They identified, they complained, we heard it, we helped them solve it, and we worked together to solve it. So when you talk about the education, this is how you educate the business partners. What does procurement actually do? And this is how you can promote what you do. So again, the education works both internally and externally. And so that's what we did here. So next slide, please. This kind of sums it up. We went from a purchasing or tactical organization to a very strategic, to what I mentioned before about the value chain organization beyond what's expected. Now, the case that I just showed you, that's probably not what any of you expected to be seeing today. We're influencing the corporate strategy, going to the business partner in technology and saying, hey, we want to make this procurement thing an agile project. Press the envelope, market focus, helping to ensure that speed to market is improved. If we have a product to market, supplier engagement, cycle time significantly reduced, you're going to get faster time for product to market. And so that's our trend line, and that's how we kind of help follow that. The 3 Ps enable success: people, process, platforms. And look at all the ways you can measure value. Note what's not on there. You know what's not on there? Savings. Because all those other things, people forget about that, what we do, the execution, better risk management and governance, customer satisfaction. We are first and foremost a people organization, not a finance organization. Remember that. Better supply relationships, better spend visibility, and consolidating of efforts. The 3 Ps: people, process, platforms. And that, in a nutshell, is what I wanted to make sure that you understood today. don't assume that your customers are satisfied. Voice the customer surveys, use them often. Let them be part of the solution. They can complain, but let them be part of the solution. And the way we contribute to the organization, many, many, many ways. Savings is down the list. It's important, but it's down the list. Do all this, and you get greater value recognition. And that is essentially what I wanted to share with you today as far as promoting and educating what we actually do. Just by way of background, as you can see, mostly financial services, but in manufacturing, a few other companies too. ISM is definitely a great resource and always has been for me to help network and share ideas. And I think, Brandon, I guess the slides will be made available for the folks after today's call. But I was really excited to be able to share this today because this case study that I walk you through is near and dear to me because we were rolling up procedures from the very beginning with the business partners to make it work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Kevin. I do want to say for now, people attending, please put any questions that you have in the chat. The rest of the section here, the rest of the presentation is all going to be a conversation now. So we have Kevin for the next 30 minutes, everyone. Let's have a conversation with him. Let's ask him things and try to really get to the root of what we need to figure out here. But Kevin, I do actually want to start off with something, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you recall, when we were kind of talking a little bit about this, I love ISM. I've been an ISM member since for over 10 years now, it seems. I think I first joined back in 2012 or so when I had first gotten introduced to the world of procurement. And since then, I've done all sorts of different things with the organization, one of which is instructing. So I'm an ISM instructor, helping different companies get certified or just further their knowledge of strategic sourcing and procurement. One of the times when I was at a client's site, and this is one of the first times that they had actually gotten their decentralized procurement team all into one room, right? So we had probably 20 people that were from procurement, usually manager level or above, and they usually never get to see each other. And we were at one of their headquartered locations. So what they decide to do is they say, hey, our head of product and our head of sales, these two guys have not yet met our procurement team. The leader invites them in. They start having a really good conversation, but it's mostly these leaders talking about what they do, right? And then at the very end, they said, do you guys have any questions? And nobody raised their hands and they were about to walk out. And I said, actually, I don't work here, but I do have some questions for you guys. And one of my key questions that I asked was, how can procurement better support the goals that you guys have and the goals of the company? Right? Because all procurement goals should be our stakeholder goals. And one of the first types of, the first response that we received, and this was the standard response from both of the leaders, was that just keep saving money. Isn't that what procurement does? And he literally said after that, I don't know what else you guys do. And so my question for you is, if you were in that room with that leader, right, that procurement leader, right, let's say everybody else leaves and you have one-on-one time with him, what do you say to that procurement leader where these other VPs of the organization don't know what procurement does? Where does this guy need to start? What does he need to do to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brandon. It's going to sound silly, but I would start with this, a pen. And I'll give you an example, a live example of how this pen came to be. Well, it came to be from manufacturing, but that's another story. I had a business partner that came to me that was on the sales side. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to get a new software tool to be able to provide the commission statements for their salespeople. What she expected me to say was, okay, do you want to do an RFP? Do you have a couple of suppliers in mind? I said nothing of the sort. What I said to her was, are you sure you want to do that? And she looked at me. She said, excuse me, I thought you were here to help me. I said, I'm going to help you, but here's how I want to help you. Are you confident that your salespeople are being compensated according to the fair market? If you look at their competitors, is their commission rate comparable to the market? If you look at, some of the key competitors that we deal with. And she said, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I said, well, I have an idea. I would love to be able to give your salespeople visibility into their great commission rates if we knew that they were really good. Why don't we try looking at having a consultant come in first and analyzing the market, come back to you and say, your rates are phenomenal. I mean, you're paying head and shoulders above your competitors, or the opposite, say, look, I think you got to look at, revising your commission structure, or else you're going to lose people. And she thought it was a great idea. And she said, yeah, let's do that. You have some potential suppliers in mind? I said, yes, actually, as a matter of fact, we do. We have a stable of preferred suppliers that we can connect you with, and we can start building a case, let them provide a proposal. Let's do that. Let's them do the study. Based on the results, then let's help build that RFP and get the tool that you need for. Because you mentioned to me, I forgot this part of it, Brandon. You mentioned to me that you don't have a time sensitivity on this, so we have the time to do it right. And she loved the idea. She left my office and she came back in. She said, huh, I actually thought you guys were just the people that bought us pens and pencils. And so that's why it was all about the pen.
Interesting. Wow. And that makes a lot of sense. So part of what you're saying is how do you accurately use data and kind of put together the right type of story to really demonstrate some of that value, kind of what you were talking about before, going in that sequence in terms of gather the supporting evidence, build your case, and then you're able to present that through the opportunities that you're currently experiencing. So she had a problem that was going on at that moment. You stepped in and said, here's how we can use data to solve your problem, pretty much.
Correct. That's right. And the more business partners that you share that insight with about what we do isn't what you think we do. Yes, we do that, but we do other things too. Another example would be I had a business partner that said, "Hey, we're looking at getting this new product to help support our sales team. It's a promotional product, and we've talked to several suppliers already, and we've compared the prices. But can you kind of help us look at which one makes the most sense?" And I said, "We can do that, but you've already done a lot of that stuff. But in the future, don't do any of that. First, work with us to build the requirements, and we'll be the extension of you. You have a day job. Our day job actually is doing this. So we want you
Mhm.
to focus on what you do for a living. We're going to help you. And also, by the way, you probably shouldn't be talking much details with any of them until there's an NDA in place, and we will do that on your behalf as well. We also want to understand if any of the suppliers you've talked to are viable. So we would also run them through, a vetting process and the supplier risk mitigation before you go down the path. And you don't want to waste your time on any of this or the supplier's time if you don't have a budget for it. We'll also help make sure you've secured the budget.
Exactly, exactly. My next question, I think is going to be relevant for a lot of people on the call or even those that might listen in a little bit later, but it's around what happens, or rather, let's say, for example, I'll phrase it this way. Let's say you're a leader within a procurement organization and you find out that the organization is struggling with working capital and keeping their expenses down. Your team is not very large, but it's adequately sized. Let's say your entire procurement department is around 10 to 15 people. Let's say the leader of this company says, well, one of the things that we're going to do is reduce headcount. And they say, we're going to start with procurement because we don't feel as though this is going to drive enough value to the organization. If you were that CPO, what three main things would you tell that leader in terms of, hey, here's the value that procurement brings. Maybe this isn't a good decision. Have you ever been in that situation before? And what would you do?
Yeah, fantastic question. Very relevant, I think, for a lot of people that have either experienced and have heard about this experience happening. It's very easy to make procurement a target. And the reason why is because we're not bringing in revenue. So
Right.
if, well, while you're not contributing to the company's, profit and loss statement in a way that we can see, so do we need all these people? Most organizations, people is their largest investment, especially service organizations. Without your people, you don't have a business anyway. The procurement function, when it's understood correctly, this is not an organization that you want to take lightly because of all the things I mentioned earlier about the ways we promote value. But the way I've spun it is, why start with people? How are you spending your money? Who's who's negotiating this contract? Are they all coming through procurement? What we can do is take a first pass at all the contracts we have in place and look at the terms and maybe go back to suppliers and renegotiate better terms. Maybe it's even moving the payment terms from 30 to 60.
Hmm.
Well, you can't really do that. You can't negotiate a contract in mid-flight. You most certainly can. If you're in procurement, you know that. And if you're not in procurement, it's you're asking a child to play with matches and not burn the house down, right? So it's educating even the CFO that yes, procurement is a cost function, but that cost function helps drive a higher profit margin and improves the P&L for the organization if you work with it from the beginning and let it do the right things. It can operate lean. You want to have less people in procurement? That's fine. You can use automation tools to help drive the process. We do that today. We've taken a lot of the manual steps and made them automated. For example, when someone from a business comes to us and says, "Hey, I have this new request," we talk through with them. Does it make sense? Goes into a sourcing pipeline. We built in a workflow that legal gets notification right away. Hey, heads up, we're going to have this contract coming your way shortly. IT risk gets a heads up, data privacy, whoever needs to be involved is notified right away. Don't worry, we're not going to give you last minute notice. This project's coming your way. Here's what it is. Finance gets notification. You have budget, you don't have budget, stop the project, whatever the case may be. So it's educating the business on procurement isn't a burden. Procurement is an augmentation to help support the business's growth.
Exactly. And what I like a lot about what you've said so far is that each time you're talking about building your case, you usually also talk about, and I think this is important for everybody on the call, you talk about gathering the data to back it up. So you're not just going to those leaders saying, hey, we can help add to the bottom line and we can save money, but you're saying, let's find out an actual number, an actual value that we can put to our contributions. And you're also talking to them about the ways that procurement can do it better than somebody not in the department or industry. In addition, you're talking about the process that you can also go through to carry it out. And I think for everybody listening, the reason why that's important, I think, Kevin, you're kind of doing these things naturally after being in procurement for so long, but it's important because you want to instill that confidence in the stakeholder that you're actually going to get things done. And then you have to work with people whose minds work in all sorts of different ways, which can be for a lot of people by the numbers, right? You're a lot of the time CEOs and leaders work by the numbers. And if if you're just coming in there with a broader mindset that simply says, here's what I'm trying to do for you. You don't have all of these different elements to back it up. It can go in one ear and out the other, right? But instead, you're saying, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, and here are the results that we expect to achieve. And I think that that is genius there.
Yeah, no question, Brandon. And I think it's really important to remember that I said earlier, we're a customer service function, not a finance function, even though we, try to reduce costs. What we also are, though, is a creative function. And here's another example that I want to share with everyone because a lot of times what will happen is a business partner might come to us, or they might not, with something that is a very low impact project as far as the dollars. It's a $5,000 project. Got a lot of other things on our plate. I mean, can we really be dealing with this? I had that reluctance one time. I had an experience where an SVP came to me and said, the benefits team, wants to see if we can get a better deal. They're getting these booklets to hand out to everyone on the open enrollment. And I said, "Oh, okay. Never worked with them before. Sounds interesting. Their budget's 5,000." And my jaw dropped. I said, "Well, I have bigger projects. I cannot have to work on that." But he said it could be a stepping stone to other things. And we hadn't worked with the HR team at all. So I thought about it. I said, "Okay, let me give it a try."
Yeah.
Now I'm going to speed the story up a little bit, but I called up the head of benefits and I said, "Hey, I got you a better deal on your books." And she said, "Well, that's fantastic. How did you do that?" I was trying to negotiate with them and I only got them to give me like a 50%, 50-cent discount per book. And I said, "Well, I got you 25% off." I said, "I don't know how that's possible. How'd you do that?" I said, "I looked at the book. You sent me a sample and the author's name was on the book. I found his agent. I contacted the agent and I said, "Hey, is he available by any chance? I want to talk about this book that our company's interested in buying." I told him why we were going to use it to help promote all the different benefit options for our employees. And he said, that's exactly why I wrote the book. That's great to hear. Matter of fact, I'll save you on the shipping costs too. I'll pack them all in my truck and I live in Rhode Island. I'll bring them down to New York and you can do what you want with them. And so after that, HR came to us on every single project, big and small.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's, yeah, you demonstrate the value there. You made the connection, you formed the relationship properly. I love it. I'm going to pause and I want to read this comment from Sean Jones here. I think this is very nice. One of the things he talks about, because before I even read the comment, I was thinking about this before we started the session. We're all here because we want to learn something new and we want to advance our skills, right? We're like I said before, we're all very busy people. I have suppliers that I'm actually about to jump out to in a second, right after we end it and get back to, right? And one of the things that Sean just has put in our message here is he talks about how data helps tells the story, and procurement can be a strategic weapon, and it supports the success of the business. And that's exactly what you were saying, Kevin. I love that part. And then he also says that he really loves how you articulated the different tools and approaches that illustrates the value that procurement brings to the business. Now, my question, kind of bouncing off of Sean's comment here, is we have people attending and people that will see this recording from various levels throughout their career. And often when I think about something like, how do I demonstrate the value to my stakeholders? I'm thinking about that now at my stage in my career, but I don't think that I was thinking about that as a senior analyst or somebody in the first 5 to 10 years. What would you say is the importance of understanding and being able to articulate that strategic value earlier in your career? Do you think that it's important for somebody just entering the space to know how to talk about the value of procurement? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting. Here's the way I look at it. Um, what we do, whether you want to call it procurement, sourcing, supply chain, is a microcosm of society. And what I mean by that is the business world has changed from the 1800s, 1900s, the 20s, all throughout history. The business world continues to change and evolve. New technology comes in place, new focuses come into place. You've always had roles that are called sales or marketing or finance. But think about what we do. It used to be called purchasing, then maybe it was corporate purchasing, then it was procurement, global procurement. In the 90s, before that, you wouldn't see it, believe it or not, but in the 90s, the word sourcing started appearing in the dictionary,
Hmm.
supply chain. So we continue to evolve and change. We're a microcosm of the business world, and we're the only function that can say that. Every other function has always been what it's been. It's always been accounting, always been finance, always been legal. We've never stayed the same. We're a chameleon that changes with society. And so anyone coming into the business new, I always tell them that. I've had intern programs that have sponsored and said, you're in the best field because you get to wear every single hat and every function in the business at some point in your life. But think about it. You're the only function that can say that. So be creative. Think of things that the business partner doesn't think of, and don't be afraid to share it. But be very mindful of the fact that you're a customer service organization. You're supporting them. You don't want to make them look bad. You actually want to make them shine. So there's a way you have to also do it that way. So that's what I say. Be always open-minded and creative, and think outside of it.
I love that. I love that. And I think that people kind of entering in look at sometimes procurement in corporate America in general as this place where you have to fit inside of a box, you have to be super well defined. And what you're saying is procurement is flexible. You don't have to be in a box, you don't have to play always by the rules, but rather you can use exactly who you are as a person in your space to come up with innovative ideas and kind of have that creativity there and wear all those different hats. And one of the things that I'm sure we all have a story about is somebody that worked in procurement and then joined their stakeholder group later on because they said, "Hey, I've learned so much by working with you guys. I've often replaced people like that. Actually, not like, hey, I fired them and replaced them, but I was stepping into their role. Where, let's say, for example, in IT, a lot of people look at procurement IT as a way to break in to the actual field of IT without
Correct.
having to know all of some of the hard skills there. But I guess one of the other things that I want to kind of ask as a follow up to that, right? One of the things that you kind of mentioned it with what you said before about our job is to help stakeholders look good. And kind of as I said before, I think that our personal lives and our professional lives are usually very intertwined. The things that we enjoy to do personally, we will probably enjoy doing that professionally. And I was once, not too long ago, hanging out with some old college friends of mine. And it's been over 10 years now since I graduated college. So it's like, hey, whenever we get together, we always talk about old times and all that. And there's this one friend of mine where the reason that we were actually hanging out is he was hosting an event. And in my mind, the only thing I could think about is he invited me to this event that he's hosting. I'll be helping out with it. My main job is to make his event look as good as possible, right? Because that's all, in the world of procurement, that's all I think about. Hey, I have to make my stakeholders look as good as possible. So my question kind of goes back to, what would we tell some of the people entering the field? If you had to give somebody within their first 5 years some level of advice to say, hey, think about these either one, two, or three things. These are the main things that you should think about in terms of how you operate in this world of procurement. What would
Mm.
your advice be to them? You don't have to, you can think on
Yeah,
it, you don't have to get it right
yeah.
away. But my main thought there is, what do you tell somebody in the beginning that you wouldn't want them to forget over their procurement career?
Yeah, I think most importantly, there's two things that are most important. Be a creative thinker,
Hmm.
and this actually extends beyond procurement, but the most overlooked skill in business, the most important skill that's often overlooked, is listening.
Yes.
If you didn't listen to what your business partner was telling you, you're dead in the water. You didn't listen to the supplier, you're dead in the water. Um, I was in a meeting one time, and I had some really good ideas and I wanted to share them. And so I kept sharing them and sharing them and sharing them. After the meeting, my SVP, he said, you have great ideas, but you don't always have to share them. You can just absorb and listen. I know that you already have that covered. Don't even bother. It's a given. So just listen and absorb. And it was great advice. And I think that's, again, listening. Again, look, you talked about outside of your personal life, not just at work. People often don't listen. They just want to hear themselves talk, or they talk over the other individual. Hear what the person has to say, right?
That is a really good one. And often, awkwardly, I have to coach suppliers on how to listen better all the time. And I think that that's one of the key things that is sometimes a barrier from forming good relationships with suppliers. If I'm not listening, they don't feel heard. I'm missing some of the key points. But to me, most importantly, if they're not listening, I know that they're probably not going to be a great partner because they don't truly understand all of the different pain points that we're working with. And then, in addition, one of the other things that that you also talked about was the ability to be creative in the space, right? So right now, as I said before, I have these suppliers that I've been negotiating with. In the other room, I said, "Hey, I'm going to go do this thing. You guys have lunch." And so we
Right.
had some other stakeholders take him out for lunch. But part of what was happening today was I came up with, I would say, a creative solution to something, right? Let's say, I'll boil it down because I know that we have just a couple of minutes left with our time with you. But my real quick example that I also want to talk about, because people that you're in the beginning or maybe you're experienced and seasoned, be creative, figure some of these things out, right? So the situation was they had scoped out a project for us. Later on, they realized that a component was not properly scoped, but we already paid for them, paid for the service, and they already guaranteed a certain amount of savings based on what we paid for them. And we were kind of going back and forth. My side's talking about, do we get our legal involved, and their side's talking about, well, we need to give you some chargebacks. And without getting into all the specifics of it, I said, hey, as I'm listening, because it didn't seem like everybody was listening, right? So I said, as I'm listening, it sounds like the main issue is XYZ, right? A lot of it was, what do the numbers say on our books versus what we paid? And I said, if this is truly the issue, then how about we do XYZ as our solution, right? And to me, the importance of the listening part was you uncover the root cause that is usually going over everyone's head because they're not listening carefully enough to care about the other person and what their motivators and goals are. So I guess one of the final, and actually before I get on to some of the final questions here, I do want to read some of the other comments that we've seen come through so far. And one of the ones that's talked about is, and actually I'll just read this latest one here. And also I do want to thank Sean for some of your other comments and talking about, if you know your audience and you know your customers, how beneficial that can be for your career overall. But one of the latest comments says, when introducing creative solutions, how do you ensure you're educated in the new technology before introducing the solution to the stakeholder? That's a really good one. My first response before I pass it over to Kevin is, do as much homework and research as possible, but then also see whatever it is in action and then test out every solution before you present it. But Kevin, what are your thoughts on that question that came in? How do you
Yeah,
present this to stakeholders?
yeah, it's a great question, and Brandon, I don't disagree with your take on that. What I would also say is, remember, you're here to support a business. What sometimes happens when procurement is new to an organization or to an individual in the business, they view procurement as a threat.
Mm,
So it's actually okay to say, when you go into the business partner, now I'm not an expert in this. I've started to look at, here's what I found so far, but I can actually use your help as we dive into this technology a little bit more. I want you to be my business partner, my SME, till we get the best deal here. How great would that look for you, business partner A, if we end up getting a sweet deal here, we reduce the cost by 15%, we have improvements in our efficiency because of the technology, and you're a big part of that solution. I'm happy to promote that with you and let you get the glory, which is along for the ride. So it's okay to not know everything, but you definitely want to be informed. I think that's very
mhm.
important.
Exactly. Exactly. So we're almost at the end here, Kevin. We have about 4 minutes or so left. I want to really pass it on over to you and say, what else do you want to tell people? What else do you think maybe we haven't covered so far that you think is important around being innovative in procurement, and then also understanding the education and journey of yourself and your stakeholders? Any other final pieces that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think the one thing I always stress with people, I mentioned it earlier, is that we are a constantly evolving function. Don't be stagnant. Always continue to learn and grow and develop. Be open-minded. Listen to all your business partners. Listen to your suppliers. Find out what's happening in the market. Get the pulse in different categories, and understand they need to be flexible and agile and support your businesses that help them. We are here to address their needs, not the other way around. It's not like, the business partner says, boy, you know, I'm hoping, procurement will do something for me. No, it's actually about the business partner said, I need to get this deal in place. Maybe procurement can help me. So always be mindful of that. We're here to support the business. So do everything you can to educate yourself, promote yourself, share the value, and continue to grow and develop.
That's wonderful, Kevin. One last piece, because you kind of sparked this memory in my head here. How do you promote yourself as an individual within procurement? What is the best thing that you can do to get the word out there about your expertise, your ability to help people? How do you do that in a corporate environment?
There's two ways. One way is I mentioned earlier about the benefits booklet. Influence. Once you've showed a business partner that you're someone they can go to, they'll always come back to you and they'll pass the word along. Very important. Get testimonials. You have a quick win, say, hey, I'm glad I was able to help you. Can you do me a favor? Can you just write a testimonial, put it on a newsletter, and get that out to the business partner? So
Nice.
remember, part of what we do is sales. We're selling our services. So you got to advertise as well.
I love it. I love it. So make sure you're documenting that, collecting the data, distributing that properly. I love how you always kind of go back to, if you don't write it down, if it's not recorded somewhere, it's almost as if it didn't happen or it has no value or impact there. So
That's
whether
right.
it's small or big, make sure you're writing it down, you're sharing that with people properly, and you keep a record of all the great things that you've done. So I do want to say thank you, Kevin. This hour with you has been fantastic. I really do appreciate the time. We will share your slides, we'll share your contact information so people can get in contact with you, follow you on LinkedIn, and just keep up to date with all the amazing things that you're doing. So thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully everybody that did attend will see you on the next webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me. Take care, all.
Thank you.